Here is every widespread technique that I've been able to find for playing jazz chords in the left hand. 2-note Bud Powell Shells, root on the bottom and a chord tone on top, normally 3rd or 7th. 3-note shells, root on the bottom with 2 chord tones on top. Tritone shells, isolated tritones, sometimes with added extensions. Rootless Voicings, a set of rootless shapes with lots of extensions for every chord type. Thelonius monk shells, a pair of compact dissonant shapes which can be played over any chord. 7/9 Substitutions, a system that gives us a redonkulous number of different shapes that can be played over any specific 7/9 chord. And finally, melodic minor voicings, 2 melodic minor shapes that can be played over any chord derived from the melodic minor scale. I'm going to show you how these techniques work, their relative strengths, how to use them, and when to learn them. Unfortunately, a step-by-step walkthrough for every technique would A, take forever, and B, be super boring. So instead, I've made a cheat sheet to go along with the video. So anything that you want a bit more detail on, you can look at the cheat sheet for, and you can also peruse that at your leisure. So it's probably a more convenient way to have the information at hand. We'll go through these in order of difficulty, starting with Bud Powell Shells. Bud Powell shells are simple 2-note voicings which always have the root on the bottom and a chord tone on top, normally the 3rd or the 7th. Every chord has a 3rd and most chords in jazz also have a 7th, so you can use root 3rd and root 7th for pretty much every chord. You can also use root 6 on major 7s, major 6s and minor 6s. Root 3rd shells can actually be played as 10ths by moving the 3rd an octave up. Now, I find these bloody awkward to play, but if you're blessed with enormous hands, they can sound pretty cool. Bud Powell shells are open, clean, and punchy, which makes them really good for backing up fast swing melodies. The root 7 shape is especially useful as it can be played really low on the keyboard. We can combine root 7 shells with more sophisticated left-hand voicings, which tend to live a little higher up, to get some of that much-needed bottom end into our left-hand accompaniment. As a teacher, I'm a big fan of these 2-note shells because they're really good for beginners. They work on every chord, they're easy to find and to play, and they sound great. And it allows beginners to play really gnarly jazz chord progressions with super basic chord theory. 3-note shells. Very similar to Bud Powell shells, root on the bottom and now with 2 chord tones on top instead of 1. Root 3rd 7 and root 5th 7 are the simplest 3-note shells you can play, and again they can be played on basically any chord. Adding 9th to 3-note voicings is a great way to add some jazzy colour, though they are a bit stretchy. Root 3rd 9, root 7 9 and root 6 9 are the most reliable combinations in my experience. 3-note shells keep some of that clean open quality that 2-note shells have, but they fill out the harmony a bit more. Let's demonstrate this on the first couple lines of All the Things You Are. First, we're going to play it with 2-note Bud Powell shells. And now let's make that a bit richer and a bit fatter by using 3-note shells instead. Tritone shells. A tritone is a 6 semitone interval with a dissonant and distinctive sound. You can play a tritone shell over any chord that has a tritone in it, by isolating the chord tones that outline the tritone and ditching the rest. For example, dominant 7 chords feature a tritone between the 3rd and the 7th. So to play a tritone shell over a dominant 7, we just play the 3rd and the 7th of the chord. The tritone interval can be found in dominant 7s, minor 7 flat 5s, minor 6s, and diminished 7s, which have 2. We can also add extensions to these basic tritone shapes. To the dominant 7 tritone, we can add the 9th and the 13th. To the minor 6, we can add the 9th, and to the minor 7 flat 5, we can add the 11th. And all of these tritone shells can be played in any inversion. Tritone shells are super punchy and dissonant, usually much more so than a 4-note voicing of the same chord. So let's demonstrate this on the first couple bars of a blues. First, I'm going to play it with standard full chords, so root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. Let's do that again, but this time with our punchy tritone shells. To me, that second version is so much better. The tritone shells just have a lot more impact. It's a really good example of less being more. With Bud Powell shells, 3-note shells, tritone shells, and just a little bit of rhythm, you can make any jazz standard sound really nice and like a little bit pro, like a pro who's kind of holding back. Here, let me show you. So nothing I'm doing there is complicated or technically demanding, and this is my new favourite way to get my students playing standards and learning about chord theory, because it sounds good and it's so beginner friendly. I'll be releasing a course on this style on my website, pianosource.com, in the next few months or so check that out if you're interested. Rootless Voicings. Rootless voicings were developed in the 60s and they're most commonly attributed to Bill Evans. They are a set of fixed shapes for each type of chord, and as the name suggests, most of them don't have a root. They're also chock full of extensions, which makes them sound really fat and jazzy. Rootless voicings look intimidating, but there are just 4 sets of shapes to learn, and then once you've got that, you can use them to play any type of chord. So first we've got the major 7 set for major 7 and major 6 chords. Then the minor 7 set for minor 7s. Next is the dominant 7 set. Now this shape can be used to play dominant 7s, minor 7 flat 5s, minor 6s, and 7 alts. And finally we have the 7 flat 9 set. And this shape can be used to play 7 flat 9s, obviously, and diminished 7s. Rootless voicings are lush and sweet and the most stereotypically jazz sounding chords that we're going to learn today. Because they are rootless, they often cloud or even change the underlying harmony of a piece when played solo, because there's no root to put the chord in context. This isn't really a good or a bad thing, it's just another flavour. Here's a version of Misty with just rootless voicings, so there's no roots, but it still sounds really good. As we touched on earlier, you can combine rootless voicings with stride techniques and root-based left-hand shapes as a way to include the root and put these voicings in context. Here's another version of Misty with some stride and 2-note voicings chucked in with the rootless shapes. The last 3 left-hand voicing techniques we're going to look at are a bit more theoretically involved and thus trickier to find than everything we've looked at so far. But that's really all that's difficult about them. They're just difficult to understand. They're not difficult to play. So if you can wrap your head around the theory, you can start including these like funky, interesting sounds in your left-hand accompaniment as soon as you understand it. Thelonius monk shells. Thelonius Monk developed this pair of tight, dissonant 3-note shapes and found a way to play them over every type of chord. Thelonius Monk shells don't clearly outline the chord, but that's fine because they don't clash with the chord and they sound good, so who cares? And they do kind of outline the key that the chord is from. So many jazz chord progressions are constantly changing key. For example, the first line of Giant Steps. So we can still hear that changing harmony, even though I'm playing all those chords with these Thelonius Monk shells that are barely hinting at the actual chord. And that's because each chord is from a different key. So shape 1 is just a semitone interval with a major 3rd interval stacked on top of it. This shape works for any chord derived from the major or melodic minor scales, but the chord tones it's applied to depends on the type of chord. So, for example, over a major 7 chord, this shape is applied to the 7th, root and 3rd. But over a minor 7 chord, it's applied to the 9th, 3rd and 5th. So that just leaves 7 flat 9s and diminished 7s, and that's what shape 2 is for. Shape 2 is again a semitone interval, but this time with a minor 3rd interval stacked on top of it. Over 7 flat 9s, it's the root, flat 9 and the 3rd, and over diminished 7s, it's the major 7, the root and the 3rd. When you want something for the left hand that's sharp and a bit off kilter, Thelonius monk shells are pretty hard to beat. They're also a good way to get a bit of edge and dissonance into otherwise sweet chords. Let's demonstrate this on the 4th line of All of You. First, we're just going to play it with some standard 3-note voicings. Sounds lovely, but it's a bit tame. Let's see if we can spice it up a little bit by adding in some Thelonius monk shells. Seven flat 9 substitutions. I've shown you 2 different 7 flat 9 shapes, the Thelonius monk shell we just looked at and the 7 flat 9 voicing that we looked at earlier. The headline for this next technique is that both of these shapes can be played over 4 different 7 flat 9 chords. So what that means is the rootless voicing for C 7 flat 9 can also be played over E flat 7 flat 9, F sharp 7 flat 9 and A 7 flat 9. This technique gives you a crazy number of jazzy and exotic sounding shapes that you can play over any 7 flat 9 chord that you see. I'm going to use the first few bars of Stella by Starlight to demonstrate this. So first we'll play this with the standard rootless voicings that we would use for these chords. Alright, this already sounds pretty jazzy because we're using these rootless shapes, but let's see if we can't dial up the jazz some more using our 7 flat 9 substitution trick. Alright, cool, that sounded different. Maybe this time I could do 2 substitutions instead of 1. Yep, that works. Let's try a different combination. Yeah, I like that one, that sounds cool. And the next chord after this is F7, but we could make that an F7 flat 9, and while we're at it, might as well substitute that one as well. You get the idea, this just gives you so many options. And not all of them will sound good, but some of them will sound crazy cool. So there are 3 families of these 7 flat 9 chords, one for each scale that we get the chords from. And in each family, all the shapes for all the chords are totally interchangeable. So that means that you can use any of the shapes for any of these chords on any of these chords. You could memorize which chords go in which family, but there's a much easier way to do it. First, take the root of the chord that you want to substitute. We'll use C7 flat 9. So the root is C. And now, all we have to do is go up or down by minor thirds to get the roots for the other 7 flat 9 chords that this can be substituted for. Up a minor third, 1, 2, 3, gives us E flat, so we know we can use E flat 7 flat 9 shapes on C. Up another minor third, 1, 2, 3, gives us F sharp, so we know we can use F sharp 7 flat 9 shapes on C. And up another minor third, 1, 2, 3, gives us A. So again, A7 flat 9 shapes are all good for C7 flat 9. And we can go in the other direction as well. So if we go from C, we go down a minor third, 1, 2, 3, we get A. Down another minor third, 1, 2, 3, we get F sharp. You get it, so on and so forth. Melodic minor shapes. These 2 shapes are exclusively found in the C melodic minor scale. And you can play them over any chord from that scale. So that would include C minor 6, E flat major 7 sharp 5, F7 sharp 11, A minor 7 flat 5, and B7 altered. So this trick works in a really similar way to the last one. Instead of playing the chord, we're outlining the scale that the chord is from. The 2 shapes are 1-3-5-7 and 3-5-7-9 of the melodic minor scale, and they can be inverted every which way, though I do tend to find that the root position and second inversion work best most of the time. So there's a couple of ways to connect these shapes with the chords that you can play them over. One way is simply to learn all of the chords that go in all the different scales. The other approach would be to learn what those shapes look like in the context of those chords. I've outlined how both approaches work for every type of chord in the cheat sheet. If you want to explicitly outline the sound of the melodic minor scale just with a left-hand chord, these shapes are maybe the best way to do it. They generally create a darker and more dissonant sound than the other shapes we've looked at. So let's demonstrate this on blue and green. We're going to play the first couple chords using the standard rootless voicings that we learned earlier. Sounds perfectly nice, but that A7 sharp 9 chord is from the B flat melodic minor scale. So we can use our B flat melodic minor shapes on that chord, and that will give us a way to bring in a slightly different sound and harmony while we're sitting on that A7 sharp 9. So every technique that I've shown you today is an accepted, well-known method for playing a left-hand chord that's used by, millions of jazz pianists. But of course, they're not the limit. So you can use these techniques to kind of get familiar with all the different things you can do with left-hand chords, but then you can use those to come up with new crazy stuff. There's really no limit to what you can do. So yeah, have fun with it and see what you can come up with. Oh yeah, and don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the bell.